Hello everybody, and now we're going to take a look at Chapter 7 pertaining to maximizing utility. Remember, utility is that notion of what any kind of benefit you get from a product. So if you buy a product or a service and you get some sort of benefit or enjoyment from it, that's an example of utility. So we're going to look at ways to maximize that. So we're going to look at, first off, what is the law of diminishing marginal utility, some theories of consumer behavior, how do we maximize utility and its relationship to demand, income and substitution effects, and finally, applications and extensions. So the law of diminishing marginal utility is probably something you've encountered before in your own lives. You just may have not known the actual term. And what it means is, as you consume more of a good or service, the marginal utility or additional utility you get from more of this good or service decreases. Think of going to McDonald's or whatever your favorite fast food restaurant is, or Taco Bell, and you get your Big Mac or you get your chalupa or something like that. Obviously, the first one, you're going to get a lot of utility from it, especially if you really wanted to go there, you really wanted a Big Mac. You're going to get a lot of utility. Now, if you get a second one, you'll probably still get utility from it if you're still hungry, but it'll probably be less than the first. But now think of, instead of 1 or 2 Big Macs, you wind up buying 4 or 5 of them. You're probably going to get little to no utility by the time you get to the 4th or 5th Big Mac. So as a consequence, by rule economically, the more of something that you consume, the less and less utility you will get from additional units. And that's why your demand curve is downward sloping. So remember, utility, once again, is the concept or satisfaction one gets from consuming a good or service. We can't really quantify it with anything. It's not something we can put a dollar sign to or anything like that. And everybody's utility is subjective. You may get a lot of utility from a Big Mac, and someone who's a vegetarian obviously wouldn't get any. So utility is only as good as the consumer themselves. The product or service has to be something that the consumer wants. So it's not necessarily the same as usefulness because it varies. It's subjective. Everybody's utility is different for the same products, and it doesn't mean anybody is right or wrong. It just means we're all different. And it's difficult to quantify. We can't really put a dollar sign on it. You can say, I love going to McDonald's, or I love pizza or something like that, and I get a lot of utility from it. But it's not really something we can put hard units down to quantify. And one other thing to keep in mind, utility and usefulness are not the same. An item which is essentially useless can provide a lot of utility. So utility we would consider as 1 unit of pleasure or satisfaction from a good or service. Total utility is your total amount of satisfaction you get from that good or service. And marginal utility is extra satisfaction you get from an additional unit. So as we move from 1 Big Mac to 2, the additional utility you would get from eating that second Big Mac, that's your marginal utility. So marginal utility is simply the change, or delta, which means the delta sign means change. You may have encountered that before in a science class. That means change. So what marginal utility is, it's the change in total utility divided by the change in quantity. And it can be very large or it can be very small. It can even be negative. So if we look here, and back to my Taco Bell example, here is tacos. So obviously if we eat no tacos, we get no utility. We eat our first taco, our utility is going to be 10. So we get a decent amount of utility. If we go up to 2 tacos, now we're going to add 8 more units of utility, so it is less, but still a lot. 3, we're going to add 6 more units, going to 24. 4, we're going to add 28. 5, we're going to go to 30, so 2 more units of utility. So even at 5 tacos, we're still adding some more utility. By the time we get to 6 tacos, the change from 5 to 6 is the same. We're getting no additional utility from that 6th taco. So we're probably full at 5. We can force ourselves to eat a 6th taco, and it's not going to make us any less happy, but it's not going to make us any more happy either. By the time we get to the seventh taco, we're now in the negative utility zone, meaning we're overfull, we're probably not greatly enjoying eating that seventh taco, and our total utility is now gone down. So marginal utility can be negative. Think of all of the products that you enjoy, but after you hit a certain point, you would probably not be very happy if you continue to consume more of them. Food products are a very good example, but this applies to really any kind of product or service. You don't just simply get more and more satisfaction from an unlimited amount of something. So let's take a look here at some theories of consumer behavior. So in any form of economics, we remember, say, people act in their own rational self-interest, meaning you buy the goods and services that you want that are going to give you some sort of a benefit. No one is forcing you to buy products, therefore you're going to buy things you enjoy or that you might not enjoy them, but you might need them. So for all of those reasons, we expect both consumers and producers to act rationally, to make products that people want, to purchase products that they get a benefit from. So that's rational behavior. Now, preferences change based on people. Each consumer has clear-cut preferences and some idea of how much utility you might get. Generally, when you buy something, you at least have some idea of what it's going to do for you or how much you're going to enjoy it or something like that. And everybody is constrained, remember, by their budget. So at any point in time, consumers have a limited or fixed amount of money to spend, and we have to use our budget to buy the appropriate mix of goods and services for whatever we want or need or all of the above. And how do we do that? Well, we use the prices of those goods and services. Goods and services have prices, and they're scarce relative to the demand for them. You can't buy everything at all points in time, so you have to make budgeting decisions. So what we say is that consumers try to act in a way to maximize their utility. So we would say a consumer is in equilibrium when utility is balanced per dollar at the margin. Well, what does this mean? Well, it means that a consumer will allocate his or her income so that the last dollar spent on each product yields the same amount of extra or marginal utility. So what we mean by this is consumers are going to spend their money or their budget in a way to maximize their own utility. So when using this rule, it's important to express marginal utility of the good as marginal utility per dollar spent, since the two goods probably have different prices. So we have to find the marginal utility per dollar by dividing the marginal utility by its price. So that's how we're going to compare goods. The reason being, everything costs different amounts. So if we look here, we can look at a bunch of various products. So we're going to look at apples and oranges. So if we look at just simply utility, as we buy more apples, we start at 10 and go all the way down to 3 by the 7th. And since the apple costs $1, our marginal utility per dollar is exactly the same. We're dividing the marginal utility by the price. Oranges we get more utility from, so they start at 24 and go all the way down to 4. But marginal utility per dollar we have to divide by its price of $2, and it's only now slightly more than the apples from 12 all the way down to 2. So the marginal utility for apples is right here, and the marginal utility for oranges is right here. And that after we get to a certain point, when we get to the fifth one, from the 6th and the 7th, we're actually getting more utility per dollar from the apples than the oranges. The reason being the oranges they cost more. So when determining whether to buy apples or oranges, we're going to compare marginal utility per dollar, not just simply marginal utility, because everything costs a different amount. You may get a tremendous amount of utility from a product, but you may not be able to afford it. So that's why marginal utility per dollar is what's used in making decisions. So if we look here, we can think of how we can spend our income. And choice number, first apple, marginal utility per dollar 10. First orange, marginal utility per dollar 12. So what would we do? We would buy the first orange for $2. We're starting with $10 here, so now we have $8 remaining. Now choice number 2, we can buy the first apple or the second orange. We would, in this case, buy both. The reason being, they give us the same amount of utility per dollar, so we're going to buy both the apple and the second orange. Now we have $5 remaining. Choice number 3, what are we going to do here? The second apple would give us 8, the third orange 9, so we would buy the third orange in this case, more utility. And now we have $3 remaining, and then the second apple or the fourth orange both give us 8. We would buy both, and now we've used up our budget. So that's a way to budget in a rational sense where we maximize the amount of utility we get for our money. Now, not everybody is doing this mathematically all the time when they're buying things, but in our mind, when we value products, this is what we are doing when we try to determine how much of a benefit we are going to get from them relative to their cost. We do cost-benefit comparisons all the time. So utility maximization and the demand curve, if we look here. So basic determinants of an individual's demand, and everybody's demand is different. Preferences and tastes, there's no right or wrong answer here. You might greatly demand a product which your best friend may hate, and neither of you are right or wrong. It all depends on preferences and tastes. Income is another one. Once again, you might want a product, but if you cannot afford it, you don't actually count towards its demand. So as a consequence, income is very important for determining demand, and also prices of other goods. We looked in the previous chapter about things like substitute products. So if substitute products, depending on their price, that's going to change your demand for something. So your demand for Coca-Cola might go down if Pepsi goes on a big sale, and your demand for Coca-Cola might go up if Pepsi goes up in price. That's an example of prices of other goods. So once again, the point to take away from this is the following. If we understand the utility maximizing rule, it makes it easy to see why price and quantity demanded are inversely related. As we get more of something, we get less benefit from it, and we'll take a look at an example here. So at the price per orange, at $2, quantity demanded is 4. At $1, quantity demanded is 6. So at a price of $2, consumer represented in the data maximizes utility by purchasing 4 oranges. The decline in price to $1 disrupts their initial utility maximizing equilibrium. So instead they're going to now buy 6 oranges instead of 4. Even though they're going to get less utility from number 5 and 6, they're now so much cheaper that it's still positive to do. So a simple price quantity schedule emerges, showing you 2 points on a downward sloping demand curve. So as we look here, as the price goes down, quantity demanded is going to go up. So we get less utility from oranges 5 or 6, but now since they cost so much less, it's now in our interest to buy them. When they cost $2, however, it was not in our interest to do that. So what's the income effect? The income effect is the impact a price change has on a consumer's real income. So if something gets a lot more expensive, it is going to reduce your income. If it gets cheaper, it's going to free up income and you can buy more. So if things are getting more expensive, like we've seen recently with inflation, consumers have to make decisions. They now have less income to allocate to these goods or services, whereas if things are getting cheaper, they can now buy more of the above. This is all going to affect that notion of equilibrium for the consumer. And finally, what's the substitution effect? Well, that's the impact a price change has on a product's relative expensiveness. So if the price of a product is going to fall, it's going to become cheaper, its relative expensiveness will be less, and the consumer will now substitute more of this good for the other. So Coke and Pepsi here is a good example. Let's say we're comparing Toyota Camrys to Honda Accords. If Honda runs a big sale, manufacturer rebates, the Accord's now $3,000 off and the price of the Camry didn't change, you're probably going to see the Accord sales go up and the Camry sales go down. So when the price of an item declines, consumer will no longer be in equilibrium until more of it is purchased, and the marginal utility of the item declines to match the decline in price. So more of this item is purchased rather than another relatively more expensive substitute. So with Coke and Pepsi here, if Coke goes on sale, buy buy one 12-pack, get one free, you're probably going to up the amount you buy because it is now a lot cheaper. The equilibrium will be reestablished at a different quantity. Whereas before, we may have bought a lot less. So what are some applications and extensions of all of this? Well, number one, let's think about new products. New products are a novelty, and when you have new products come out, they can often get perceived as having a lot more utility than alternatives. So a good example is the iPad. When the iPad first came out in about 2010, it was a new product. It was very popular from the get-go, and consumers gave it a lot more utility to price than other products. There were other tablets that existed at the same time, and people valued the iPad, even though it was a lot more expensive, as being a lot more useful. And this resulted in a major shift in demand for the new product as consumers attempted to increase their total utility. So why do some goods that are essential to life have low prices and goods that are not essential have high prices? Well, this is very subjective, but the way your book explains it, and the way I would explain it, is the following. The marginal utility of the last unit of water consumed is small because we drink a lot of water all day long, and the marginal utility of the last diamond is large because we consume so few diamonds. So even though water is essential to life and diamonds don't really do anything for us other than look pretty in jewelry and make engagement rings and things like that, we don't really get much additional utility from another glass of water because we consume it all the time. Meanwhile, most people aren't buying diamonds on a daily basis. Non-cash gifts may yield less utility to the receiver than a cash gift of equal value because the non-cash gift may not match the receiver's preferences. An example being someone buys you a $1,000 laptop computer, but let's say you have a brand new laptop computer. It's a very nice gift, but you may not get very much utility from it because you may already have a brand new computer that you may have specifically chosen. Whereas someone gives you a $1,000 check or $1,000 in $100 bills, that's probably going to have a lot more utility to you because you can use that cash to buy whatever goods or services you want or see fit. So non-cash gifts only have good utility if it's something you want. Think at Christmas, you get the Christmas presents you want. Obviously, you're going to get a lot of utility from those because you wanted them. You may have asked for them or hinted or something like that. And obviously, you get a lot of satisfaction when you rip open that present and it's exactly what you asked for. However, if you get a present that you have no need for, and think of all of the things you may have regifted before or donated because you didn't use them or anything else, it's still nice that you got a gift, but you're not getting very much utility from it. So on our final word here, how do we deal with utility in regard to taxes with products we perceive to be harmful? Well, we put taxes on particular products to try to change consumer behavior. There's a term for this in macroeconomics. If you've ever taken macro with me or any other professor, you've heard it. It's called a Pigovian tax. And what it means is we're putting a tax on a product to make it more expensive and, as a consequence, have less of it consumed. The reason being here, excise taxes like those in cigarettes and liquor can deter consumers from buying such products by decreasing the marginal utility per dollar for each additional unit purchased. However, these taxes can have unintended consequences, and in many cases in real life, consumers altered the way in which they did things. So the British window tax or the Spanish room tax or the Dutch canal frontage tax, consumers significantly altered how they built their homes to avoid taxation. People are very creative. People will always come away with ways to avoid taxes, both legal and illegally. And as a consequence, think of all of the places you might drive to another state where cigarettes are a lot cheaper, or load up on cigarettes when you go to duty free, or Native American reservations sell cigarettes basically tax free. There are a lot of ways that people can get around these things. So as a consequence, they aren't always as effective as we think they are, but the logic behind them is make the product more expensive, reduce the utility per dollar, and as a consequence, get people to cut down on these products. Generally, taxes like this are put on products that we deem harmful to individuals or society. And that's going to bring us to the end of chapter 7.